Colorado Springs, Colorado, known to be home to America's Mountain, the Air Force Academy, and Garden of the Gods. But this growing city is known for another thing, being Olympic City, USA. The Springs is home to nearly 500,000 people. With the elevation of 6,000 feet, this city brings challenges to competitive athletes. While it is known as the Springs, it was known as something a little different in the 1870s.
Colorado Springs wasn't the first name of this city. The first name was Fountain Colony. Fountain Colony was named that as the investment project that General Palmer set up originally, where people would invest in it in order for there to be a community that was seen as a sort of residential colony where people got their villa sites, paid for those, made improvements on those, ultimately owned them themselves, and lived in this upstanding moral community. Fountain also was the name of Fountain Creek originally.
The city was founded in 1871 by Civil War hero General William J. Palmer. General Palmer had a vision of what Colorado Springs could become. After working hard on the railroad, he set his stake in the Springs.
General Palmer was the Gilded Age version of a developer. And he was a railroad developer coming out here after his experiences in the Civil War. He was the construction supervisor of the Kansas Pacific Railroad. When General Palmer founded Colorado Springs, there's a spot where they drove into the ground the first stake of staking out the community for Fountain Colony in 1871.
The town grew on morals that General Palmer had put forth into the small community. Being a Quaker, a Christian devoted to peaceful principles, encouraged the moral standards for the Springs.
So Colorado Springs was really intended to be a very moral, Eastern style, upper class style town of wholesome people. Also a town of churches, also a town of trees that it didn't already have, also a town of educational institutions, everything that he thought would make the ideal wholesome community like back east. And one of the things that he particularly emphasized was that there be a health spa, because he discovered that there were mineral spa worthy springs. They're not in, or at least then they were not part of Colorado Springs. They were part of what becomes Manitou. So he, with a friend, co-created the spa city of Manitou almost simultaneously with Colorado Springs. So he'd be bringing people here for multiple reasons.
As the city grew, the nickname Little London began taking a role in promoting Colorado Springs as a good place to live in the West. Nearly 30% of the population was British, including General Palmer's wife, Mary.
Little London became a nickname because it was like his hometown. There were plenty of British people who wanted to visit the area, or like him, visit the Wild West. London, it implied all sorts of things to people, good advertising.
As the city grew and developed, a new threat was on the loose. Tuberculosis was spreading throughout America as well as other countries around the world. In 1854, sanitarium cure for tuberculosis was introduced by former tuberculosis patient and doctor Herman Bremer. Bremer mentioned his long-term stay in the Himalayan mountains helped cure his tuberculosis. Colorado Springs promoted the Rocky Mountains to have a similar effect, along with using natural spring water to help heal the sick. With many new cases, the city created multiple sanitariums to help overcome the disease.
Because we had so many tuberculosis sanitariums in the 1890s, it had the nickname Sanitarium City. Colorado Springs itself would become a mecca for people with tuberculosis. And originally, people didn't understand that how tuberculosis was catching. In fact, most doctors in America didn't understand the germ theory of disease, of how disease spreads, until maybe about 1885. So people moved here to get over tuberculosis. So Colorado Springs became a place to go to stay in the sanitarium and overcome tuberculosis.
General Palmer suggested that the natural spring water in high elevation would heal tuberculosis. What is now known as Matute Springs has 8 different mineral springs available. With the belief of how healing these waters are, people would travel from around the world to get a taste.
The spring water was part of an overall picture of taking a healthy vacation. He also invited the healthy ideas by establishing Manitou as a health spa. So P.T. Barnum was famous for exaggerating. And one of the things that he said about Colorado when it was first being opened up and when Palmer wanted it to be so boosted was he said, what you notice when you come to Colorado is all the sick people who came there to get over terrible diseases like tuberculosis and found that in that air, when they came there to die, they just couldn't do it.
As Colorado Springs became more modern, it began to attract a new psychographic of people. Athletes would travel to Colorado Springs to train. Some athletes would train for local events, but some would compete in the Olympics. The Olympic Training Center was established in Colorado Springs in 1978 and is located near the center of the city. Recently, the city of Colorado Springs decided to change their nickname to Olympic City, USA.
Well, Olympic City, USA is extremely recent. It's really only been proposed as an official title for the city in the last few years because of not only the Olympic Training Center, but the new Olympic Museum and all of the Olympic activities, the headquarters of the Olympic Committee. That's been growing for decades, but actually naming the city after it is quite new.
The Olympic Training Center has training facilities for over 40 sports, such as figure skating, gymnastics, and boxing. This facility also offers Paralympic training in over 20 different events, like cycling, shooting, and swimming. But before it housed thousands of competitive athletes, it was an Air Force military base.
Air Force Base could be seen as existing from between 1943, in the middle of World War II, to 1976. Then it becomes the Olympic Training Center in 1978. The biggest competition for the Olympic Training Center and being sort of an Olympic center had been Denver, and Denver just had political difficulties at the time.
A wide variety of high-performance athletes not only train, but also live in Colorado. With 13 years of professional weightlifting, Olympic athlete Jenny Arthur trains in the Olympic City.
My name is Jenny Arthur and I compete in Olympic style weightlifting. I went to the Olympics in 2016 in Rio de Janeiro. At the Olympics I placed 6th. I moved to Colorado in 2012. I moved to Colorado for the Olympic Training Center, so I received a resident slot to train with the other Olympic athletes at the Olympic Training Center. Training at the Olympic Training Center is incredible. I mean, they have all of the resources there for you. I see a lot of other people training in many different events when I train at the Olympic Training Center. There are bobsledders, swimmers, cyclists, wrestlers, all of these athletes. We pretty much train together in a sense because we see each other in crossing and we see each other at sports med, in the sauna, in the strength and conditioning gym, and it's just such a great atmosphere that it's incredible for a good training environment.
Colorado Springs is home to over 200 miles worth of trails and home to thousands of athletes. With the Olympic Training Center and all the natural athletic challenges of Colorado, it is no wonder why Colorado Springs is called Olympic City, USA.